Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be starting in 30 seconds. Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Association for Court Management webinar, sponsored and presented by Reconnect, the 2021 Caseload Avalanche. Be prepared. My name is Charleston Carter, and I'm the Trial Court Administrator for the Superior Court of North Carolina, 26th Judicial District in Mecklenburg County. I'm a member of the NACM Board of Directors and serve as the Chair of the Communications Committee. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Sam Hotchkiss, who is the founder and CEO of Reconnect. Mr. Hotchkiss has 11 years of experience in working with court and supervision programs across the country, giving him an intimate knowledge and experience with the challenges facing our courts. Reconnect is a software company aiming to connect programs and the participants from anywhere by leveraging technology. They use an evidence-based platform to help probation, pretrial, and parole in doing three things. That is to eliminate busy work, empower participants, and embrace remote. Today, before we get started, I would like to go over a few items with you so you'll know how to participate for the event. This presentation will be approximately 60 minutes long, and we are recording today's webinar. The recording will be available for attendees after the presentation and for members on NACM's website. Please take a few minutes to complete the survey after the webinar. If you are joining the webinar today on your computer, you may submit questions to today's presenters throughout the presentation by typing your questions into the question pane of the attendees control panel. Mr. Hotchkiss will address your questions during the question and answer session at the end of the presentation. Please welcome the moderator for today, Mr. Sam Hotchkiss. Please introduce your panel.
Great, thank you very much, Charleston, and thank you to everyone for joining in. Happy holidays. Glad to have you with us today. So we're going to jump right in. Why are we here today? So one of the greatest pandemic challenges that's been faced by the criminal justice system is unfolding here in 2021. During the pandemic, most courts have worked at limited capacity, and as a result, the pending case backlogs in most states is staggering. Complicating that situation, most jurisdictions are facing pandemic-related budget cuts, and that's shrinking their resources when they need them more than ever. We have 4 experts in this field here today to talk with us, and I'm going to go through and introduce each of them, tell you a little bit about them, and ask them a couple of questions that are specific to their jurisdiction. That should take about 20 minutes here, and then we're going to dig in and welcome questions from you to any of our panelists, and we'll go from there. So we're going to start off with Joel Bishop. Joel has led justice initiatives in Colorado and Texas, which have focused on integrating best practices into the justice system. The reforms in Mesa County, Colorado, and El Paso, Texas, have led to award-winning efforts recognized at the state and national level. Since 2017, Mr. Bishop has served as the Executive Director of Justice Support and Community Support in El Paso County, overseeing the Criminal Justice Department, Public Defenders, Domestic Relations, and Community Services. He also serves as the Southwest Regional Director of the National Association of Pretrial Service Agencies, or NAPSA, a role he's held since 2016. He's been a featured speaker at the state and national level on various justice and community initiatives, and was most recently a featured speaker for NACO for the county's response to the COVID crisis. Thank you for joining us today, Joel. I'd send you over a couple questions ahead of time, but first we want to dig in. What's the current state of the case backlog in El Paso, and how does that compare to where you were last year?
Well, thank you for having me, Sam, and I appreciate it. Good to be with you all today. Great question, and I think staggering, it was the adjective you used to describe it, and that's an accurate term. We've seen a 40% increase in cases in the last year for the actually 41% to be precise, the total caseload of pretrial supervision over the past year, and it's especially grown since the start of the pandemic. Really what we're seeing, and I think most jurisdictions are build up of cases coming in without an outlet. So the outlet's been largely blocked and the cases keep coming in. So the supervision periods are getting longer and more cases are coming out without a resolution. And so we're already up to 428 cases per supervision officer, which is way too many. Our public defender's office, I spoke with the chief yesterday, that they reported similarly as well, a 40% increase in their cases. So it's not just pretrial, but the courts, I think it's similar. We don't have an exact number yet from the courts, but it truly is staggering.
Thanks for sharing that. And when we spoke earlier, you noted that El Paso had implemented a system to scale down on pretrial supervision without judicial intervention. Can you tell us a little bit about that program?
Yes, 2 years ago, we implemented an operational model for the use of our risk assessment. And it also takes into account the type of crimes that defendants are charged with and the risk level of the defendants. So it was developed collaboratively. Our administrative judges signed it, the district attorney signed it, the sheriff signed it, the chief public defender signed it, the trial services director signed it. And what it did was it created a supervision structure for defendants when they're released from jail. And among many things, in addition to a continuum consistent with best practices from more intensive to very less intensive supervision, it allowed for pretrial services to reduce the supervision of defendants based on compliance. Now, what we had noticed is that it hadn't been utilized yet, but when the pandemic came in, I spoke with the director of pretrial services, and I reminded him that this was approved as part of the model. And so it was something that they started looking at very closely. They re-collaborated with the judges and worked very closely with them to remind them of that option and to make sure that they were still prepared for this, so it didn't catch them off guard. And the judges were very supportive. And so what that's done is it's allowed them, you saw the cases go up, but the intensity of supervision goes down. So they were able to crank down the level of check-ins, the level of meetings and requirements without a judicial intervention because it had already been pre-approved. Now, this is a good best practice anyway. It's a good incentive for the clients, but it's something that they're using to mitigate this significantly increasing workload and caseload. So we were very, very excited.
Sounds like about the only way to handle almost 450 clients on your caseload.
Yeah, exactly. And I would just say too, some of you may say, well, we don't have something like that, so what good does it do us? Well, I would just mention real quick that if I didn't have this in place, what I would do is get with the judges and do it by crime type, nonviolent defendants with nonviolent criminal histories, and just try to get a kind of a carte blanche approval to reduce supervision across the board and see if your council of judges would pass something that would allow you to do that. So it's not just a solution for us, but I think this is something you could collaborate with that would be helpful in your jurisdiction as well. So did you want me, Sam? There's a couple other things. I don't know how I am on time. I better stop there if we're running short, but there was some other things we did as well.
Let's hold off for now, and then we'll get into that hopefully in the question period. Next up is Ed Gordon. Ed is the co-founder and COO of Justice Point, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the promotion of evidence-informed criminal justice programs, practices, and policies. For the last 8 years, Mr. Gordon has been responsible for establishing the overall direction of Justice Point, as well as the achievement, I should put your slide up here. There we go. As well as the achievement of agency goals and objectives. Simultaneously, Mr. Gordon has worked with local, state, and national stakeholders, legislators, and the community to shape broad criminal justice policy decisions. Thanks for joining us today, Ed.
Thanks, Sam. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Like Joel, I know you were doing some digging into the current case backlog there in Milwaukee. What is that looking like now, and how does that compare to last year there in Milwaukee?
Yeah, that is a very good question. I appreciate being a part of this panel and being able to have this conversation. The latest data, I actually talked with one of our court administrators today. Overall, as our chief judge had been speaking with the Bar Association over the last few months, and one of the things that she continuously was updating on was their projected length of case backlog, how long it's going to take to clear that up. And so as of the latest data, which I think was looked at in the last few weeks, they're estimating probably the backlog, just COVID-related backlog, of about 24 months. And so that's based on the information that they have at this time. They said that the courts are currently operating at about 80% efficiency, which is obviously going to compound the issue somewhat. The interesting thing, as a pretrial agency, we run a 24/7 jail screening operation. And so anybody that's arrested who is facing a likely bail setting decision is screened by one of our staff. And our screening numbers are actually down year to date as of today, about 24%. That's partially due to probably less cases being filed. But one of the primary concerns of the entire system, and one of the biggest unknowns at this point, are the number of people who are sort of cases that have not yet been touched by the system. By some estimates, there's about 2,000 cases potentially, which will be filed but have not yet been filed. So exact accurate timelines as far as how long it's going to take to clear up this backlog are somewhat cloudy at this point. So, and then on our pretrial supervision caseload, and I speak as a practitioner running a pretrial agency in Milwaukee County. At one time, we were up near 30% on our caseload capacity as far as what we could handle as a supervision entity. We've made some impacts, and we're down to about 18% over what our contract requires, or contract permits, which we're obviously moving forward and helping in whatever way we can with the courts. One of the big reasons we were able to do that, though, is similar to what Joel was just talking about. Some really detailed early on conversations looking at groups of people who have either been performing very well on pretrial supervision, people who are on maybe low risk, but based on criminal history or risk assessment scores, things like that. And they've been sort of able to have judges and input from both sides of the bar about which groups of people, or individually, especially if there's victim notification needed, which individuals can be dropped off of pretrial and what kind of metrics are required for that. So that has helped to drop us from a near 30% increase on our pretrial caseload down to about 18, but things are stretched thin. We're worried about future budget cycles as well.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Ed. You said the courts are operating at about 80% efficiency. That's still going to cause backlogs, but that's a better number than I've heard from a lot of jurisdictions that we've talked to. So it'll be interesting to see, how that bears out across the country. And what are your biggest concerns around having this multi-year backlog?
Yeah, obviously the biggest concern, I don't think this will be a surprise to anyone listening in, but just the likelihood of future non-intentional failures to appear at court dates. A lot of people don't have a very deep knowledge of the system. They know they get arrested. The difference between a ticket and a misdemeanor and a felony is often sort of confusing, to the best of us. And when you may have gotten some police contact in, say, June of 2020, and you have a court date, your initial court date may not be for months out, and it's by Zoom. You're not quite sure what the timelines are, where you need to be. So I think that's definitely a significant concern just non-willful failures to appear. I'm especially concerned of those folks. We do a lot of business outside of Milwaukee County as well, throughout the state of Wisconsin, a little bit into Minnesota. And in Milwaukee, we haven't seen a huge increase, but elsewhere we've seen large increases in use of electronic monitoring. That is, it can be a very useful tool in certain situations, but what we tend to see, this is very anecdotal, but the longer people have spent on electronic monitoring, especially with the more restrictive conditions that are set on them, the more likely of a technical violation of some sort, whether forgetting to charge a battery or, stepping outside your inclusion zone or things like that. So that's another concern I specifically have is people having potential bail jumping charges filed for, the longer period of time people have to non-willfully commit a violation of some sort along those lines, the more likely that is to happen. So that can compound things once again as well.
Yeah, no, it's challenging to ask someone to walk a tightrope for an extended period of time, right? And to maintain that level of vigilance over an extended period. No, that makes a ton of sense. Well, thanks for joining us today, Ed. We'll talk to you more in just a moment. So Shay Alexander is joining us from Atlanta today. She is the CEO of Check Rain Consulting since June 2018. At Check Rain, she provides business consulting, management consulting, and project management for courts and other businesses. Before her role at Check Rain, she served as the Chief of Courts Bureau for Fulton County Superior and Magistrate Court for 10 years, where she administered the daily operations of the Court Services Branch, providing management and oversight of branch functions, as well as serving as the principal advisor to the Clerk of Superior and Magistrate Court. Thanks for joining us, Shay.
Thank you, Sam, for having me.
Yeah. So what's the current state of the case backlogs of the clients who you're working with? What are they experiencing, and how does that compare to where they were last year?
So we've seen, and I'll talk about some of my Georgia clients, we've seen just a huge increase. So I'll start off by saying before the pandemic, there was a backlog. And so now you can imagine how the backlog has increased because of this pandemic. The criminal cases, the inmates that are incarcerated once the arrest took place, and we found ourselves in March trying to figure out what to do, right? Like, okay, we have to stop transporting the inmates from the jail to the courthouse. What are we gonna do? How are we gonna, triage these cases? And it's just been very, very problematic with the backlog. So we are looking at different ways, and as a consultant, I know this pandemic has been really hard on everyone, but it was like the timing for me to be able to offer some, advice to the different jurisdictions as to what steps to take, and what I've offered a lot of solutions on moving the court forward during this pandemic.
Yeah, and can you share some of those with us? How are your clients getting ready to work through their backlog?
So, there are different approaches, based on the jurisdictions. The judges operate different, but for one of the biggest things that I found that's been helpful for most of my clients is to talk to them about 2021. So when the world opens back up, who knows when that will be, but when it does open back up, courts won't be the way that we've seen them traditionally. Things have changed. It's just over, right? And so technology plays the biggest part of all of this, the way that we think of it. And so instead of transporting inmates from the jail, like we've done historically, to the courthouse for these hearings, if it can be done virtually, that would be the way to go, right? And so in 2021, we're talking about the budgets being more around the equipment and the technology in the courtrooms, the infrastructure at the jail, the Wi-Fi capability. I'm not an IT person, but the first challenge was, okay, we're gonna have all these Zoom rooms at the jail, and then here we go, where's the Wi-Fi? We don't even have Wi-Fi on certain floors at the jail because we didn't need it before now. So the technology plays a big role. So most of my advice to my clients are, first of all, let's look at the infrastructure and try to determine what technology and equipment is needed. And then we look at how we handle court different. For these cases that the inmate doesn't have to, be in front of their accuser or see the police, or those type of hearings can be held virtually, right? And then only save the, I guess, the high profile cases and the cases that are the 7 deadlies or the more egregious crimes. We have those folks come to the courthouse for hearings. So a double budget, right? You're gonna have to work on the backlog and figure out ways for the backlog. And so we talked about a backlog budget plus the current budget. And you're gonna have to operate in 2 dual systems, extra judges, PDs, prosecutors, and that such, clerks. You're gonna have to have a dual operation in order to get with the backlog, especially in those jurisdictions that have a high population.
Great. Thanks, Shay. And yeah, we're looking forward to talking more further. And thanks for joining us today.
All right, you're welcome.
And last but not least, we have Jarvis Anderson here. Jarvis was appointed as the Director of Bexar County Community Supervision and Corrections Department in December 2009. He served as Vice Chair and Region 4 Representative to the Probation Advisory Council, the PAC of Texas. The PAC is comprised of directors of various CSCDs around the state and provides consultation to CJAD and the Judicial Advisory Council to improve community supervision services in Texas and shape legislative and administrative policy. Jarvis began his career at the Bexar County CSCD as a CSO back in 1993 and has held various positions within the department to include court liaison officer, staff trainer, and manager. He's an active member of several multidisciplinary committees, associations, and work groups. He is a Texas Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration Gaines Center Trauma-Informed Responses Trainer. Whew, that's a lot of big words in a short period of time. Thanks for joining us today, Jarvis.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned when we talked earlier that the number of clients who you're seeing start on probation is down significantly over the past year. And you mentioned that you haven't been hiring to replace staff who've left. Where does your staffing level sit today in comparison to where it was last year? And are you going to be able to hire quickly enough once case numbers start to pick back up?
Well, that really is a complicated question, right? You would think cut and dry, the answer is yes and no. But just think about last year, first quarter, we were only about 18,000 people on probation. In first quarter, we're at 14,000. So we're down 4,000 cases, which translates to about 37 officers in my department. So we're sitting, as of today, 420 employees in my department, whereas a year ago, we're at 470. And just so you know, it's not only has cases been trending down in our state for a while, but when the pandemic hit, it basically bottomed out. The trick for us when my staff started to retire and move on, I didn't replace them. And unfortunately, we had the trending of cases going down where that was a luxury. Other departments didn't have that luxury. They actually had to furlough some staff just to make the budget. And on top of that, we had directions from the state government leadership to reduce our budget by 5%. And going into the next legislative session, we have the same order to reduce our budgets by 5%.
An additional 5?
Yeah, additional 5. So all of that is troubling on our end, right? So we're down 4,000 cases from quarter to quarter. It's one, you still have to provide the services to the people that are on probation. You still have to provide the community a level of safety as well. So you replace cases or positions that are critical. And so we have to do that, and for us, we have 12 different specialized caseloads. When I have someone leaves that particular unit, I replace them. But on my regular line caseloads, I'm not replacing them. And I don't foresee replacing that regular line caseload for at least another 6-7 months.
Yeah.
Depending on how things shakes out. Just to give you just the smallest snapshot of that. And so we were averaging new cases on probation in the first quarter, about 700 new cases a month, right? Now we're averaging about 400 cases a month on new cases. And the big telling part for us when the pandemic hit, for the month of May, the courts granted 304 cases. Month of April, we only granted 54 cases. And so that's how we see that drop there. And And you know, optimistically, you're hoping everything starts to roll out properly. You'll see that influx. But sad to say, the bottleneck's not with probation on my end. You know,
Right.
you still have to worry about providing a safe avenue to just even plead those cases. And so just in Bexar County alone, I ran a report from January 1, 2020 until today. And just on the district court side, which is the felony level caseload, docket, 27,000 people are waiting to go to court, get their cases disposed of, just here in Bexar County, just on the felony side, you know. And on the misdemeanor side, we have 45,000 cases waiting to be disposed of. So
Wow.
we're hoping once courts do open up safely that some of those cases will come to probation. But the reality is that it probably won't happen that way.
And no, I appreciate that. And you know, one of the key issues we've been hearing, especially during COVID, has been around staffing fatigue. How do you think about that and address that within your staff?
Well, I can tell you, we even before COVID, that was always a consideration as far as workload.
Yeah.
Right? So you got to find the right number of the right size caseload for an officer, for a unit, for a region. We're fortunate enough that we had some units working remotely before the pandemic. And when the pandemic hit, our county made an investment to loan us the equipment to have our officer work remotely. I have some staff who didn't have the ability to work remotely, so we had to shift, right? So we went from a model of being a forces structure, brick and mortar organization, to a more remote organization. So just so you know, in April, we had 563 people doing Zoom meetings, right? And now we're averaging about 3,600 a month since that time from April. And some of the fatigue that helped us is having our staff working remotely or working at home, not coming in the office 5 days a week. We've expanded our work week so they can work with the clients, mainly on their level. And the other thing about that is not only you get employee with fatigue, but you're dealing with offenders or probationers or clients who they need somewhere they need to let out their own frustration. So they're taking on that additional burden as well. And so I'm happy to report that my staff has done well. And I hope we're going to continue the same pattern down the road.
That's fantastic to hear. Thank you, Jarvis. So these are our panelists. We've got a couple of announcements from NACM, and then we're going to get into your questions. So we've got a few of those here already. And don't forget, if you have questions, to drop them in the GoToWebinar box, and we will work through those with our panelists.
Thank you, Sam. Hi, my name is Jeff Chappell. I'm court administrator in O'Fallon, Missouri, part of the NACM board and co-chair of communications. Just wanted you to be aware of a couple quick items. That tomorrow is our next release of our regular podcast series from our Court Leaders Advantage video podcast, and that is part 2 of wildfires, protests, and COVID. So how have courts coped with the compounding crisis? Also, we wanted you to save the date that our 2021 annual conference will be July 11th through the 15th in wonderful, beautiful San Diego, California. I know you're all ready to travel and get out and see your colleagues again, so set the date and we hope to see you there.
Great.
Next slide there, Sam.
Yep.
For those that are NACM members, we want to thank you for your continued support and participation here with a great organization. And for those that are not NACM members, just wanted to let you know about a few of the great membership benefits. We do have some publications that come out throughout the year called Court Express and Court Manager. What's going on within the industry, the trends and hot topics. We do also offer great opportunities for mentorship. Of course, I mentioned that conference, so you'll get a discounted rate for your NACM conferences that you attend. And if you are not a member and have a great opportunity in the next 2 weeks, go on our website and you can get the discounted rate for 50% and get that before December 31st. Or if you want to give a friend or colleague in the industry a great Christmas present, we you can sign them up for a $65 membership. So see our website for further details at nacmnet.org.
That would be a very thoughtful gift. Thank you, Jeff. All right. Well, now we are on to the meaty bit where we've got some good questions here. So we're going to start off. Mr. Bishop indicated that the average caseload has increased to 428. What was that caseload looking like before the pandemic? And are you worried about burnout from your staff? Building on what Jarvis talked about there with staffing fatigue. And how do you address that potential burnout as your caseloads grow?
No, a great question. So they grew by 40%. So if you cut off 40% over the last year, that's where we were at this time last year. So yes, we're definitely worried about staff burnout. I think our pretrial services department has done an excellent job identifying solutions and collaborating with the courts on this. One I already mentioned, but the other one was hiring. We hired clerical staff. We hired 4 clerical staff to just assist them with all of the paperwork. So, and they are just so thankful for that. You know, whether you're a probation officer, pretrial officer, you can get really bogged down in the paperwork and all of the documentation requirements. And to have those staff, we thought about hiring new supervision officers, but we decided it's too much training. They need something quickly. They need something that can just help them with the busy work. And so they're very thankful that we did that. So in addition to cranking it down in our courts, our council of judges were very helpful with us in planning that and helping that. And our commissioner's court was also very responsive because we had good data, looking at being able to present to them, hey, here's the crisis that we're in, and here's the problem that we have. And so that's helped a lot. But we still are concerned about the burnout. I think that Mr. Anderson described it's definitely a concern for us as well. I think for everyone with this avalanche. It's like the coming avalanche is really already on us here. And I know Mr. Anderson probably can see it coming next year. It's going to hit them pretty hard when the courts completely open up again. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to pass that over to Ed as well, since you've seen similar levels of increased caseload within your program, how's your staff coping?
Yeah, I think generally the staff, I think there was a dip in morale for quite a bit. Just our agency, we are a nonprofit. We very much focus on, sort of, we see as does most of us in this field, right? See any opportunity to work with an individual defendant as an opportunity to set them on a path that reduces long-term recidivism. Even if that's not the stated goal of pretrial services, that's always something that's in the back of our minds. A lot of our staff come from sort of social service, social work, sociology type background, psychology. They have an interest in bettering the community, as do all of us in this work. And I think that was definitely a hit, especially early on. I think the quality of supervision contacts we've had now has increased substantially once people have really gotten used to the technology and the video and even communicating by text, things that just weren't part of the repertoire prior to this starting. So I think it's, a silver lining of COVID is it sort of advanced our ability to utilize technology by forcing it on us a little bit more. We knew these tools were here, but we never tried them out like we are now. So, yeah. But overall, I think our staff caseloads have remained, have leveled out to a point. I think cases coming in and leaving are somewhat stable. Like I mentioned earlier, the courts have been very, very helpful to work with in maintaining as low of caseloads as possible on pretrial supervision. And then, similar to what Joel was talking about, we have added some clerical staff on to help with especially things like court reminders. And this actually started pre-COVID, which was almost the foresight of the courts. They funded additional positions just to help with those simple phone calls a day or 2 days out saying, do you know how to get to your court date? Now it's, do you have access to the internet? Can you get on your Zoom call? Things like that. But I think all those things together have really maintained or at least brought morale back to where we would hope to be. So I think things are okay right now, but I am very concerned in 2021 as this wave continues to compound on top of us.
Yeah. Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense. Jarvis, are there any policies or changes that your program has put into place during the pandemic that you're hoping is going to continue after the pandemic's over?
Yes, on one, expanding our telework capabilities from specialized unit to the masses, that's one. Two, we expanded our work week going from 5 to 7. So if we need to work on the weekends, we can. With the technology itself, Ed mentioned that the quality of the report or the interaction is better. And it is, because when you're talking or you're used to talking this way with your officer, you get more comfortable with them. And so you're willing to share more things. And the other thing, we're concentrating mainly on why you're here. And that helped. The other thing we're doing as well is the fact that we're using technology, whether it's telephonically, text, or video conferencing, that's beautiful. But those who don't have that access in our brick and mortar buildings, we set up rooms for that to happen. We're going virtually digital now, where we're using Adobe DocuSign for pretty much everything. So the question is, it's not we're going to go back to that. No, it's just going to be expanding on what we can do better and make everyone more successful at this. We offer here in Bexar County or San Antonio, Texas, is a residential treatment center, 300-bed facility. And even in that facility, we actually implemented Zooming so that we can keep social distancing the best we can to deliver those services. We still have to provide services in this pandemic. We still have to have, even with my staff, so they have a level of comfort that they're safe, that they're providing for their family and the people we serve. And I think this is going to be the future for us. More virtual, more mobile. You don't need to come to me. We'll go to you if we need to. And if not, we'll do the Adobe DocuSign to get things done.
No, that's fantastic, and it makes sense. I've spoken with a couple of researchers in the last couple of weeks who have both said some version of, when you have these telemeetings, these Zooms rather than in person, the stress level for the client goes down. They're not as worried about having a probation officer show up at their job or at home. They're not worried that the call is going to end with them in handcuffs because there's no one there to put them in handcuffs, and they're seeing early signs that it's leading to better outcomes. So that's fantastic to hear. And Shay, with the programs that you're working with, what are the tools that they have been moving to? You mentioned we're never going to go back to the way that things were before, right? And we've been hearing that all year. Now that we're kind of 9 months into this pandemic and we've kind of found this new normal, and hopefully we're going to get back to something closer to the old normal, but with some of these tools that we've learned this year. What do you think those pieces that we're going to take with us are?
Well, the first thing is we're looking at, or the client should be looking at, using some other method other than the arrest, especially for the nonviolent criminals, right? And so I'll use an example of one jurisdiction where when the pandemic hit, it was like, let's just go through the population and see, who we can let out on ankle monitors, right? And so some of those folks, I know we probably let out 300 or 400 individuals on ankle monitors in the month of April, which means though, we're in December and they are at the bottom of the list for case resolution because they're not in jail. So they're not a priority. So now we have to deal with the fact, like Ed said earlier, they're on these ankle monitors since April. So something's bound to happen, whether they don't charge, they're going to go somewhere they're not supposed to go. But right now, that's what we have to do, right? So we've done that with the ankle monitors. I think the technology piece of it, I think that the takeaway from that is business as usual would not be as usual anymore, right? And so we will definitely have to look at the courtrooms, the judges that are not as comfortable with technology have to find ways to make it right, because you're going to find that, we never really want to talk about how the different judges respond to different cases and different caseloads, right? But the reality is that the judges that are more tech savvy are probably going to move their cases a lot faster than the judges that are uncomfortable with this technology. So that's the big takeaway, trying to find a way to embrace the technology for the judges that are probably be a little more resistant, for that change.
Great. No, that makes a lot of sense. So kind of open question for all of you here. What expectations should programs be setting for staff around caseloads and virtual work and courts reopening in 2021? Are you starting to get any guidance, now that we're starting to see a vaccine just this week? Do you have any kind of timeline for reopening and sort of opening these floodgates of cases back through?
I'll go first since I was the last one. So what we've seen in the state, right, the Supreme Court is actually kind of laying out the rules of engagement, right? And the Superior Court judges of the different circuits have to make a decision for their own circuit because, some jurisdictions are larger than others and, it's going to be problematic for the volume of cases. And so, juries haven't started back. We're looking at ways to have the jurors come back in where there's social distancing. The grand jurors in one of the jurisdictions, they've had when the grand jurors come back in so that some of these cases can be indicted. Some of these inmates have been in jail since April without a preliminary hearing or without being indicted. So we have to look at every aspect of this criminal justice system. And we're only talking about the criminal side. No one's really touched on the civil cases, right? Yeah. And so it's all complex. That some of the judges have civil and criminal cases, and so they use this opportunity to do some of the civil cases virtually because it's less of an impact having the people outside is getting a divorce or there's a contract dispute or whatever to get them on the Zoom session instead of having police officers, witnesses, and inmates coming in for those trials. But I just think that for 2021, there's going to have to be some extra budget set aside for courts, and that really has not been from the jurisdictions, the board of commissioners, or wherever the budget is coming from. It really hasn't been a high priority in most jurisdictions. Yeah. And I think budget is going to be the biggest factor coming in for 2021, so that they can work these dual courts and try to get some of these cases moved.
Great, thanks.
Well, I'll jump in there, Sam, and I do think before I answer that question, and because I'm not sure I can, but because I think we all have a tremendous responsibility to evaluate the outcomes of the changes that we've made. This whole virtual world, and what kind of outcomes are we getting from supervision, and what can when we think about what are the caseload expectations, well, this really changes everything, and it presents some opportunities we may not have thought about before. What can we continue with, and what can we, were they physical, all the tens of thousands of physical check-ins really worthwhile as far as the outcomes? What were we getting out of them? And I think this is an opportunity to do some comparison analytics and really challenge the way we thought about things before nationally, and as a best practice, do we need to shift gears a little bit? And I say this as as I sit on the board of NAPSA as well, we're having these conversations saying there's a big opportunity for all of us who oversee these programs to really reevaluate and think about how we do things. And I think the courts are in that same position where they're doing a lot of really neat things virtually. El Paso's done a fantastic job shifting to some virtual things that are just, we're even doing our pretrial interviews virtually. We're still doing them, but we're doing them virtually, and it's working great. These court hearings virtually right there, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, our magistrates are doing these court hearings, and we've implemented a virtual piece to this, and there's a lot of this that we could keep in place that dramatically improves systemic efficiencies across the board. So I'm really hoping that we all take this opportunity to collaborate with our stakeholders to try to maintain some of the things that are working working well that we've been forced to do during this pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'd love to jump on top of that one a little bit too. Just to further, I can't agree more with what Joel's talking about there. One of the things that we've been talking about internally for a long time is, in the pretrial field, there's a tremendous amount of research that's been done on risk assessment, on how to categorize, individuals' risk of not appearing in court or being rearrested while they're out on bail. The research as to what is the most effective strategies, what's the correct dosage of supervision, what's the appropriate use of electronic monitoring, of court reminders, of all these other tools that we have at our disposal, is an area that I think is incredibly ripe for additional research. And so, there's a lot of money that's been put into research on the risk assessment end, into putting people into those buckets of risk, low, medium, high risk. But once we have them, how do we know that an individual person, which our system is very much set up to look at people as individuals, not as groups, which I think is a lot of the pushback on some of the opposition to risk assessment. But once somebody shows themselves to be high risk because they happen to have factors that other people that are high risk or that perform in a poor way have, but once they're demonstrating success on pretrial, is it a certain number of court appearances, a certain number of negative drug tests? I mean, what are the metrics that say, yes, this person had the characteristics that lump them into that group of high-risk individual, but they're not actually a high-risk individual as measured by themselves. So I think there's an enormous amount of risk. This is an incredible opportunity. We have data and almost a forced experiment, a human experiment to take a look at, which is something that no academic ever wants to do on purpose. But when the opportunity to look at it arises, it has. I think that's something that the academic world should be getting heavily involved in. And
I think there are so many aspects of 2020 that will serve as a natural experiment for PhD researchers for the next 50 years, right? I mean, I just remember early on when all the shipping traffic shut down and they could hear whales that they hadn't been able to hear ever before because there wasn't this low-level hum of ships in the ocean. I mean, we have all of these pieces of our kind of interconnected economy that are going to be fascinating to learn more about. So Jarvis, you kind of have the flip side of this, right? I mean, they're all dealing with the crunch right now because we have this bottleneck that is the courts. And so all of the water's stuffed up here, and then that funnel's going to open and come through to you. So how are you kind of coaching this with your staff and talking about, what does it look like when you go from, 50 people coming through in April to, I think you said roughly 400 a month right now. Right. What happens when that opens back up and you're seeing 1,500 a month?
Well, I mean, and Joel mentioned it, Ed mentioned it, Shay mentioned it. It's all about data, right? You watch, you do the data. And before the pandemic, you got to look at what was the disposition rate of your courts. I have 26 courts who are placing people on probation. What was it before the pandemic? What is it now in the pandemic? And what would it be like going forward? Because there will be some adjustments that the courts will have to make sure everyone's safe. Our staff is ready. We fortunately in San Antonio, we don't have to advertise for positions. We have people we've interviewed for the last month just waiting. Again, there is a training piece to that. I can tell you for all the directors across the state, we welcome the court to open up and give us to have that problem of trying to orientate that. We welcome that. My counterpart in El Paso, Maggie Morales-Arana, she created a virtual police center to kind of help with that, which I did here in San Antonio. Going forward, I think if we expand that capacity where every jurisdiction who have the means to do a virtual police center, I think that's going to help.
Can you say a little more about that? What is a virtual police center?
Well, instead of having proceedings in the courthouse, she had it at one of our residential facilities where the defense attorneys in the state, they're conferring there, and that client actually goes there and plays instead of the courthouse. We've done that here in San Antonio. I mean, when we kind of think outside the box, where if we have, like we're doing here, this type of interaction, why can't it be done in a court setting? There are certain things legally that you can't do, but it works, you know, and if you have the right collaborative people involved, it's going to work. At the end of the day here in Texas, jail population, prison population kind of drives what happens. And so we don't want people in jail longer than they have to be. And if we can get them back through the system, right, whether it's the court system, the pretrial system, the probation system, I mean, you only address what's really, really important. I want to just submit to this. We all are focused with risk or riskier behavior. That's tough. That's kind of also with a needier behavior, right? Because why did someone commit a crime? Because they didn't have the resources or capacity to kind of problem solve with that. And it's, if you give them the right dosage, and that's huge in any aspect of this, they're going to be successful. And I submit, if we continue with that, I think it's going to help. We're on a national movement of reform in the criminal justice system. And at every juncture, we got to look at it. And it starts with the first time you engage that individual in the streets. You know, and when they come to me, you know, why are you really here? And before we used to supervise based on offense. We do the assessments, then we look what the needs are. And I guarantee you, most of these individuals have been traumatized themselves, and that's all they really know is that lifestyle. And so we're ready. We hope the courts open the spigot all the way for us, and I will welcome that problem.
Great. Great. And, you know, you hit on a topic that came up with a few of you as I was kind of talking with you over the last week, which was, you know, from a broader societal standpoint, we really focus on the negative outcomes, right? What happens when someone isn't incarcerated and they do something wrong? But we don't take enough time to celebrate the victories and the folks who do go through these programs successfully and, you know, go on to lead productive lives, be productive members of society, and give back into our collective society. And so I think it's good. You know, everyone here and I think everyone who would be a part of this webinar probably has that perspective, but it's good to make sure that we're voicing that perspective to people outside as well. So we've got 8 minutes left, so I think we've got time for one or two more questions. One that came in here was, are there additional programming or policies that you would recommend implementing to ensure participant success during 2021? And Shay, why don't you talk a little bit about that?
I'm sorry, Sam, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, if you've seen additional programming or policies that could be implemented to help participants be successful.
Participants
or clients.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess the main thing I think of is developing some best practices and some case processing standards, right?
Mhm.
Because it shouldn't be where one defendant, you know, his case is moving faster than the other because of the other circumstances. So I think adopting case management standards across the board for all courts, all judges, right? So that things are fair. Because what's going to happen is you have so many defendants that have not seen a judge, have not had a hearing, and then when the doors open, it should be that based on the time that they've been in jail, their cases, that things flow at the same pace and not based on, I guess, the luck of the draw of what system that they're going through or what judge that they're assigned to. So I think developing some policies and some standards surrounding how things are going to operate so that everybody will be on an even keel and it won't be so distorted.
Yeah, no, that's great. And, you know, Ed, you talked about your concern about, you know, unintentional FTAs. So what are some ways you think we can mitigate those?
I think, you know, a large part of it's always going to be maintaining regular contact with the defendants, making sure they understand that the importance of keeping in touch and updating their address and updating their phone number. You know, and I mean, if our staff go, you know, 6 weeks between contacts with a defendant, the likelihood of losing them is very high. So, you know, even those maybe more frequent contacts, even if it's not, you know, your traditional, you missed a supervision contact or something along those lines, but I think that's going to be a huge component of it. And then also working with, obviously, the courts and, you know, working, and I think this is a recognition that the judges already have. I think the defense lawyers for sure are going to be making this argument a lot. But, you know, the example I often use when someone has a court date, and this I've been using for much longer than COVID, but, you know, for folks who maybe don't have a regular set work schedule or don't have school that they're going to on certain days of the week, you know, the analogy I always use is, you know, if you're on a beach vacation, you fly in on Saturday, you fly out the following Saturday, you know for sure if it's Tuesday or Wednesday. You don't, because you don't need to know. So sometimes, you know, having that court reminder phone call a day or two out, helping people make sure they know how to get onto the Zoom meeting or into the courthouse and navigate their way through, that's without question. And there is research obviously that shows that as an evidence-based practice, but that's definitely our number one. It's just engagement with our clients, and that's pretty much the number one tool in our tool bag right now.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Joel, is there any kind of key takeaway you'd like us to have today? And you know, an area that you're really proud of in El Paso that you think other jurisdictions could kind of run with and implement pretty quickly?
Yeah, I mentioned the one that is just is worked really well, and I'm really glad Jarvis brought up the virtual police center, because that has been a truly, probation deserves a tremendous amount of credit, and Jarvis there in San Antonio for what a great idea and a program that you can take a long way and help the system out a lot. So these are ideas such as cite and release. El Paso implemented cite and release during COVID and 20 or 7 day a week bond hearings. During COVID, we implemented new programs to make sure we're keeping up with the latest case law that's going on in Texas and the best practices. And so less is more. Ed just mentioned it. You know, more virtual work, more outreach to defendants, maybe less, find out where we can cut off the work that is not needed and get rid of you do things virtually and keep out of the jail unless they really need to be there. There's a group that needs to be in jail, and we need to keep identify who those are and make sure we have the right people in our jails and not the wrong people there. And I think that's something that we all have to keep our eye on as we move forward.
Great. Thank you so much, Joel, and thank you, Ed and Jarvis and Shay. You know, we've really appreciated having this conversation today, and your time and insights. And thanks to everyone who's joined us today. We've been glad to have you here. Again, my name's Sam Hotchkiss. I'm the CEO of Reconnect. And we're building technology to try and help solve a lot of these problems as well, and make programs operate more efficiently. And so if that's an area where we can help you, don't hesitate to reach out. Yeah, thanks very much, everybody. Happy holidays, and have a great afternoon. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, Sam, this is Charleston Carter again. Just want to say thank you all on behalf of NACM, and thank those who are in attendance. At the end of this, you will receive a survey, and the link will be sent to your email. Again, have a superior day.